The asteroid mining colony of Nereid 7 smelled like desperation and recycled sweat. The air recycling units wheezed like old men with too many bad habits. Chief Arbitrator Jax Oban sat behind his desk, swatting at the flickering holo display as if that would make the damn thing behave. Justice in the arse end of the galaxy, he muttered. Where the tech breaks down faster than my will to live. But complaining to inanimate objects had become a habit, like drinking or regretting his career choices. His courtroom, a cramped metal box masquerading as an office, wasn't exactly the height of judicial dignity. The walls were bare, save for a motivational poster of a kitten hanging onto a branch with the caption, "Hang in there." An ironic choice, given the colony's tendency to chew up hope and spit it out like yesterday's protein gruel. Today's docket was as thrilling as watching paint dry on a hull breach. Petty theft, minor assault, a dispute over who had rights to a 6-year-old sock. The usual suspects shuffled in, their expressions a mix of boredom and contempt. Jax picked at his teeth with a judgment he'd scribbled on a napkin last week. "All right, let's get this circus rolling," Jax said, tapping the microphone that crackled like it was trying to cough up a furball. "First up, we've got Skeevers versus Hopper. Something about a stolen ration bar. Really riveting stuff, folks." The two men shuffled forward. Skeevers was as greasy as his name suggested, his hair plastered to his head like he'd tried to groom himself with engine oil. Hopper looked like he hadn't slept in a month, eyes darting like he expected to find a knife in his back. "Your Honor," Skeevers said, scratching his neck as if trying to dig through to his spine. "Hopper here nicked my ration bar. Swear on my mother's grave." "His mother ain't dead," Hopper interjected. "She's running a betting pool on whose liver gives out first." Jax sighed. "Skeevers, Hopper, you're both guilty of wasting my time. I'd sentence you to an hour in the empathy chamber, but the damn thing's been broken since the last riot." He looked at them sternly. "Just, don't be idiots. Or at least funnier idiots." As the two shuffled out, muttering curses under their breath, a junior arbitrator burst through the door like he was late for the end of the world. "Chief, we've got a situation." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Unless it's raining credits or the Rilthar Empire's declared a day of peace, I'm not interested." The junior arbitrator, a nervous wreck named Ferris, thrust a datapad into Jax's hands. "It's the Rilthar. They're doing something." "Doing something? Well, that clears it up," Jax said, scanning the report. His expression darkened as he read. The Rilthar Empire was weaponizing empathy, or so it seemed. Emotional chaos among the colonies, people turning on each other with kindness turned hostile, love as a weapon. He'd always thought empathy was overrated. "It's all over the news feeds," Ferris continued, his voice a pitch too high to be comfortable. "People are losing it. They say the Rilthar have some kind of tech, makes you feel everything." Jax snorted. "Great, as if we didn't have enough problems. Now we're being attacked by feelings. Next, someone'll tell me the Rilthar have an army of angry kittens." But the implications were clear, even through the haze of sarcasm. If the Rilthar Empire could manipulate emotions, they could destabilize entire colonies without firing a shot. And the bastards would love that, conquest without the mess. "All right, Ferris," Jax said, rubbing his temples. "Get me everything you can on this empathy weapon. And find out if there's a way to counter it. Maybe a good dose of cynicism." Ferris nodded, eager to escape the room before Jax's mood darkened further. The door slid shut with a hiss, leaving Jax alone with his thoughts and the weight of a new kind of threat hanging over him like a sword on a frayed string. As he turned back to the docket, the irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, trying petty criminals for insignificant crimes, while an alien empire played puppet master with the hearts and minds of humanity. If it weren't so terrifying, it might have been funny. Jax leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking in protest. "Guess it's time to put the judge back in Judge Dredd," he mused, reaching for a bottle of something that passed for whiskey in this part of space. "Let's see how the Rilthar like dealing with humans fueled by bad decisions and worse booze." The courtroom drama continued as Jax downed a shot, the liquid burning like anger down his throat. He'd have to face the Rilthar's challenge, like it or not. And knowing his luck, they'd make it personal. "Next case," he grumbled, reaching for the next file. "Let's hope it's something simple, like a murder." But even as he said it, a chill ran down his spine. He had a feeling that things were about to get complicated. And in the unforgiving expanse of space, complication usually meant one thing: trouble. As the next defendant approached the bench, Jax steeled himself. Nereid 7 might be on the edge of oblivion, but he'd be damned if he'd let it fall apart without a fight. Even if that fight was against an alien empire with an emotional death ray. The defendant, a surly miner with a nose broken so many times it formed its own topography, stood before him, looking like defiance wrapped in dirty coveralls. "What's your story, then?" Jax asked, flipping open the file. Says here you've been caught brawling in the mess hall. Self-defense, the miner grunted. Bloke said my face looked like a map of disaster zones. Jax chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I can see why that'd rile you up. Problem is, your story doesn't hold much water. Everyone knows if you're on Nereid 7, you already look like a disaster zone. It's a prerequisite. The miner grunted again, which Jax took as concession. Look, just keep your fists to yourself unless you want to join our fine crew on janitorial duty. Space dust never sleeps, and neither will you. As the miner shuffled off, Jax wondered how long it would be before brawls became the least of his worries. If the Rilthar had their way, it wouldn't be fists flying but heartstrings being plucked until they snapped. The colony's communication system crackled to life, a voice dripping with the false cheer of an automated announcement. Attention, all personnel. Please be advised that increased emotional awareness seminars are available. Sign-ups at the main terminal. Attendance is mandatory for everyone who considers themselves a sentient being. Great, Jax muttered. Therapy sessions. Just what we need when the enemy's got a monopoly on mood swings. His thoughts were interrupted by the courtroom doors sliding open again, revealing a figure that seemed at odds with the grimy setting. Tall, with a posture that screamed, military, and a face that could have been carved from granite, Commander Alara Varian strode in like she owned the place. Which, technically, she did, being the highest-ranking officer on Nereid 7. Jax, she said, nodding in greeting that was more of a command to pay attention. Got a minute? Depends, Jax replied, leaning back in his chair. You bringing me good news, or are we going to need more whiskey? Alara's lips twitched into something resembling a smile. Better get the whiskey. She tossed a file onto his desk, the contents spilling out like a bad poker hand. Reports, images, a map of emotional disturbances that looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. That's the latest on the Rilthar situation. Jax picked up a report, scanning it with a half-interested eye. Looks like the Rilthar's idea of warfare involves making us all into emotional wrecks. It's effective, Alara said, crossing her arms. Colonies are tearing themselves apart. People are either too empathetic to fight back or too paranoid to trust anyone. Jax shook his head. Only the Rilthar would think turning us into soap opera extras is a good battle strategy. That's why we need to act, Alara replied, her tone serious. If we don't counter this, we're looking at an implosion from the inside. Jax met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. All right, let's say we do something. What do we have? A battalion of sarcasm? A fleet of cynicism? Alara smirked. More like a handful of stubborn bastards who don't know when to quit. Including you, Jax. He sighed, reaching for the whiskey bottle. Guess that's better than nothing. But if we're going to take on the Rilthar with feelings, we'll need more than just bad attitudes and stiff drinks. Alara nodded, her expression grim. We'll figure it out. We always do. Jax poured 2 glasses, sliding one over to Alara. To figuring it out, then. And to the Rilthar, may they choke on our emotional baggage. As they clinked glasses, the weight of their task loomed large. The Rilthar Empire had chosen a new battlefield, one unseen and insidious. But they hadn't counted on humanity's greatest weapon. The sheer, unyielding stubbornness of a species too damn cussed to give up. Jax downed his drink, the burn a reminder that he was still alive, still fighting. He had a feeling that things were about to get a hell of a lot worse before they got better. But for now, he'd drink, he'd laugh, and he'd plan. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was bouncing back after hitting rock bottom with a smile and a middle finger. All right, Jax said, setting his glass down with a thud. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into. The communication system crackled again, this time sounding like it was being strangled by a cat. Attention, valued colonists of Nereid 7, the automated voice droned, now with an unexpected hint of panic. Please remain calm. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jax watched the flickering holo display above his desk sputter with garbled images of colonists running around like headless chickens. He sighed, indulging in the irony that even in space, with all the advancement humanity had supposedly achieved, a basic announcement could still sound like a fever dream. Lyra Quine, his aide and the closest thing he had to a voice of reason, appeared in the doorway, looking unusually flustered. Her glasses were perched precariously on her nose, as if debating whether to jump ship. Jax, we've got a problem. Just one, he said, turning his chair to face her. And here I was hoping for a dozen. Lyra ignored his sarcasm, which was a talent in itself. The comm system's been compromised. Someone, or something, is broadcasting random messages, and it's causing chaos. Chaos, you say? Jax replied, voice dripping with feigned shock. And here I thought it was just an average Tuesday. Jax, I'm serious. People are starting to act strange. More than usual. He cocked an eyebrow. Strange how, like actually caring about one another. That'd be a first. Lyra shook her head. No, more like over-emotional. It's like the whole colony's competing for best melodrama. Jax leaned back, eyes narrowing. You think this is the Rilthar's doing? She nodded. It's got their greasy little fingerprints all over it. Empathy weapon, remember? The thought made Jax's stomach churn like he'd swallowed a blender. So, they're turning us into a bunch of sobbing wrecks. Great. Just what we need when morale's already in the crapper. Lyra tapped her data slate, pulling up reports. There's more. The tech specs Ferris pulled on the Rilthar device suggest it's amplifying emotional responses, like cranking up the volume on feelings. Makes folks act irrationally. Jax laughed dryly. Rationality's always been in short supply around here. But now we're emoting like we're in a badly written soap opera. Pretty much, Lyra confirmed. And if we don't do something, the colony's going to rip itself apart. Jax stood up, stretching his legs. Alright, time to play therapist. Let's see what damage control we can do before everyone decides to hold a group hug and suffocate each other. They made their way down the corridor, the recycled air thick with tension. Through the grimy windows, Jax could see miners shouting at each other, tears streaming down their dirt-streaked faces. A few were hugging, others were fighting, some were doing both at the same time. It was chaos, wrapped in a multitasking nightmare. Looks like the Rilthar's gotten inside everyone's heads, Lyra muttered, adjusting her glasses as they approached the main control room. Jax snorted. Must be cramped in there. Most of these folks don't have a lot rattling around upstairs. They entered the control room, a cramped space cluttered with outdated tech and the memories of better days. Ferris was already there, looking more like a scared rabbit than usual, which was saying something. Chief, Ferris squeaked, waving his arms like a man trying to flag down an invisible taxi. The whole system's haywire. I can't get a clean signal, everything's corrupted. Relax, Ferris, Jax said, clapping the kid on the shoulder. We'll sort this mess out. Or die trying, which might be preferable at this point. They huddled around a terminal, Lyra deftly navigating through screens filled with static and glitches. We need to find the source of the broadcast, she said, fingers flying. If we can shut it down, maybe we can stop this emotional overload. Jax watched the chaos unfold on the monitors. If we don't, he mused, this place will turn into a reality show. Survivor. Emotional Outburst Edition. Lyra paused, pointing at a spike on the display. There, anomalous signal from Sector 12. It's the strongest source. Sector 12? Ferris echoed, eyes wide. But that's the maintenance deck. Hardly anyone goes there. Guess it's our lucky day, Jax said, already heading for the door. Come on, team. Let's go unplug whoever's decided to play DJ with our lives. They navigated the corridors, the sounds of sobbing and shouting echoing around them like a badly tuned orchestra. The walls seemed to close in, the recycled air stifling as the weight of the situation pressed down. Reaching Sector 12, they found the maintenance deck just as deserted as Ferris had suggested. The lights flickered, casting an eerie glow across the steel and wires, a setting perfect for a horror flick. Well, Jax said, looking around, if I were a rogue empathy broadcaster, this'd be where I'd set up shop. Lyra examined a nearby console. There's the signal source. It's linked to the main systems, but it's not from our tech. Has to be Rilthar. As she worked to disconnect it, Jax surveyed the room, his eyes catching on a small device nestled among the usual debris of tools and forgotten projects. It pulsed with a soft, malevolent glow. A Rilthar empathy amplifier, if he had to guess. Found the bastard, he muttered, approaching it cautiously. Looks like a cross between a lava lamp and a migraine. Ferris hovered behind him, peering over his shoulder. How do we shut it off? Jax pondered the question for a moment, then shrugged. Have you tried hitting it with something heavy? Works for most of our tech. Lyra rolled her eyes but handed him a wrench. Worth a shot. He took the wrench, considering the device for a moment. Then, with a swing that would have made a baseball player jealous, he smashed it into the Rilthar tech. Sparks flew, and the device sputtered its death throes. The effect was immediate. The oppressive weight of emotions lifted, like a pressure cooker finally venting steam. The distant shouts and cries began to subside, replaced by the murmur of confusion as people came back to their senses. Well, that was anticlimactic, Jax said, tossing the wrench aside. I was expecting more fireworks. Lyra examined the shards of metal and circuitry, nodding. That should do it, at least until the Rilthar try something else. Good thing we got plenty of practice dealing with their crap, Jax replied, wiping his forehead. I swear, between them and our own tech falling apart, I'm surprised this place hasn't imploded yet. Ferris looked relieved, if still a bit shaken. What's next, Chief? Jax patted him on the back. Now we clean up, make sure nobody's hugging anyone to death, and figure out how to keep the Rilthar from using us as their emotional playthings. As they made their way back to the main area of the colony, the mood was palpably lighter. People were still confused, still shaken, but at least they weren't drowning in a sea of unchecked feelings. Jax paused, looking out at the ragged bunch of colonists as they slowly pieced themselves back together. "Funny, isn't it?" he said to Lyra. "In a way, the Rilthar might have done us a favor. Gave us a taste of what it's like to actually feel something." Lyra smiled wryly. "Or maybe they just reminded us why we keep our emotions on such a tight leash." "Yeah, well," Jax said, "no use crying over spilled emotions. Let's get back to work. We've got a colony to run and a war with feelings to win." As they rejoined the others, Jax couldn't help but reflect on the madness of it all. Fighting an enemy that wielded empathy like a weapon. It was laughable, really. But that was life on Nereid 7, just crazy enough to be real. He felt the corners of his mouth twitch upwards, a rare smile breaking through his cynical facade. Maybe humanity wasn't doomed after all. Sure, they were stubborn, flawed, and often idiotic, but they were also resilient. And if there was one thing Jax Oban knew, it was that you could never count out the human race. Not when there was a fight to be had and a drink waiting at the end of it. It was another glorious day on Nereid 7, the kind of day that made you want to crawl back into your bunk and pretend the universe didn't exist. Jax Oban found himself trudging through the colony's corridors, the weight of its problems hanging over him like a particularly persistent bad smell. "Lyra, remind me again why we didn't just let the empathy weapon turn everyone into emotional zombies?" Jax asked, half joking, as they made their way to the council meeting. "Because then you'd have to deal with all the group therapy sessions," Lyra shot back, adjusting her glasses, still perched on her nose by sheer willpower. Jax grunted in response. The thought of a colony-wide group hug was enough to make him shudder. "Point taken. Still, I'm not convinced this meeting's gonna be much better." The colony council was a ragtag bunch of individuals with ambitions as grand as their egos. They were the kind of people who could argue over the color of a dust mote if given half a chance. Today, they were gathered in the conference room, a glorified storage closet with delusions of grandeur. Jax and Lyra entered to find the council already in the throes of chaos, their voices rising and falling like a particularly uninspired opera. At the center of the tumult was Marlowe, a self-proclaimed visionary with the charisma of a damp sock. "Marlowe, what's all this racket about?" Jax interrupted, leaning against the doorframe in a manner he hoped oozed casual disdain. The man turned, smoothing down his thinning hair with one hand. "Ah, Jax, we're discussing the empathy weapon issue. It's causing unrest among the colony's leadership." "Unrest?" Lyra interjected, eyebrows raised. "Looks more like you're auditioning for a screaming contest." Marlowe sniffed, affronted. "We have to remain calm and rational." Jax couldn't help but chuckle. "Right, because we're known for calm or rational decisions. Listen, bickering like a bunch of toddlers isn't going to solve anything." A sharp voice cut through the din, belonging to Zara, the colony's head engineer. "We need a plan to counteract this weapon before it turns us all into blubbering messes again." "And what do you suggest?" Jax asked, crossing his arms. "Got a magic button somewhere I don't know about?" Zara scowled, an expression that seemed permanently etched on her face. "If I had one, I'd have used it already. The Rilthar's tech is beyond anything we've seen. It's like fighting a ghost that punches you in the feelings." "Great, so we're up against emotional poltergeists," Jax said, sighing. "Anyone else got ideas?" Ferris, still frazzled from the earlier events, raised a tentative hand. "We could try to scramble their signal, maybe. Disrupt the frequency to mess with the weapon's effectiveness." "That's a start," Lyra said, nodding in approval. "But we need to protect our leaders from making decisions based on amplified emotions." Jax glanced around the room, taking in the varied expressions of concern, anxiety, and anger. The empathy weapon had turned their little corner of space into a pressure cooker, and it was only a matter of time before someone popped. "So, we focus on two things," Jax said, taking charge. "First, we need a defense against the weapon. Second, we need to keep the council from tearing itself apart over every minor issue." Marlowe opened his mouth to protest, but Jax cut him off with a glare that could have melted titanium. "This isn't up for debate, Marlowe. Unless you prefer we all end up sobbing into our ration packs." Grudgingly, the council members nodded in agreement, though the tension in the room was thick enough to slice with a dull knife. Jax motioned for Lyra to follow him out, eager to escape before someone suggested they hold a trust-building workshop. As they walked down the corridor, Jax spoke, his voice laced with sarcasm. "I love how leadership handles things. Always a pleasure." Lyra smirked. "At least they didn't try to hug you." "Small mercies," Jax acknowledged, shuddering at the thought. "Now, let's see what we can do about scrambling that signal." They made their way to the tech lab, a chaotic space filled with a dizzying array of defunct gadgets and half-baked projects. Ferris was already there, hunched over a console, fingers flying as he attempted to make sense of the mess. "Ferris, you think you can whip up something to jam the empathy weapon?" Jax asked, leaning over the younger man's shoulder. Ferris looked up, eyes wide with uncertainty. "I can try, Chief, but it'll be like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound." "Do what you can," Jax replied. "Even a flimsy band-aid's better than nothing." While Ferris busied himself with the tech side of things, Jax and Lyra brainstormed how to keep the council from imploding. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling knives while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. "Blindfolded, maybe we can set up a system that alerts us if anyone's about to make a truly terrible decision," Lyra suggested. "Or at least something to slow them down. An anti-stupidity alarm," Jax mused. "I like the sound of that. Think we could rig something up?" Lyra shrugged. "Worth a shot. If nothing else, it might buy us some time." As they worked, their minds racing to devise stopgaps and temporary fixes, Jax couldn't help but feel a certain camaraderie with his ragtag team. Sure, they were a motley crew of misfits and cynics, but they were his misfits and cynics. And if there was one thing he'd learned from his time on Nereid 7, it was that even the most dysfunctional team could pull through when the chips were down. Hours later, Ferris emerged from the depths of a wiring mess with a prototype jammer, a tangled assemblage of wires, circuit boards, and what looked suspiciously like parts from a coffee maker. "It's not pretty, but it might just do the trick," he said, holding up the contraption with the pride of a father showing off his newborn. Jax eyed the device warily. "And you're sure it won't blow us all to hell?" Ferris shrugged. "Mostly sure. Good enough for me," Jax said. "Let's give it a whirl." They activated the jammer, a chorus of mechanical whirs and beeps filling the air. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen, and then, "Hey, I don't feel like crying anymore," Ferris noted, somewhat surprised. "Congrats, you've invented the emotional off switch," Jax quipped. "Now let's see if it holds up under pressure." As they monitored the colony, waiting for signs of emotional flare-ups, Jax chuckled to himself. It was ridiculous, really. Here they were, fighting a war with feelings, an absurd concept that somehow felt right at home in their little corner of space. Nereid 7. Home of the emotionally unstable, Lyra joked, echoing his thoughts. "Has a nice ring to it," Jax replied. "Maybe we should put it on the welcome sign." The day dragged on, and while the empathy weapon's effects seemed diminished, the real test would come when the council reconvened. They'd see soon enough if their makeshift solutions held any water. Back in the conference room, the council gathered once more, their earlier fervor dampened if not entirely extinguished. Jax and Lyra took their places, ready to intervene if necessary. Marlowe cleared his throat, his voice a touch more subdued than before. "Let's continue our discussion about the empathy weapon." Zara was quick to respond. "We're working on solutions, but we also need to address the problems it's causing among our leadership. Like the fact that everyone's one emotional meltdown away from disaster." Jax interjected, earning a few scattered laughs. Marlowe glared but didn't argue. "Perhaps we should establish protocols to mitigate emotionally driven decisions." "Smartest thing I've heard all day," Jax said, nodding. "How about we set up a cooling-off period for major decisions? Give everyone a chance to think with their heads instead of their hearts." The council murmured in agreement, though Jax noted a few skeptical glances. Still, it was progress, or at least something resembling it. "While we're at it," Lyra added, her voice cutting through the din, "let's establish a system for monitoring the colony's emotional state. If things start to spiral, we can intervene before it gets out of hand." Another round of nods, the council gradually coming to consensus. It wasn't perfect, but on a colony where perfection was a pipe dream, it was a start. As the meeting concluded, Jax felt a flicker of something resembling optimism. They hadn't solved all their problems, but they'd taken a step in the right direction. And for a place like Nereid 7, that was nothing short of miraculous. Lyra elbowed him gently. "Not bad for a day's work, huh?" Jax grinned, a rare sight for those who knew him. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse. They left the conference room, the weight of leadership still heavy but a little less suffocating. There were battles ahead, sure, but they wouldn't face them alone. Back in his office, Jax sank into his chair, the events of the day playing over in his mind. It had been chaotic, frustrating, even laughable at times. But it was also a reminder of what made humanity truly remarkable: their ability to adapt, to endure, to find humor even in the darkest of situations. For better or worse, they were all in this together. And on Nereid 7, that was worth more than all the empathy weapons in the galaxy. Jax closed his eyes, letting out a deep breath. There was still so much to do, but for now, at least, they were holding it together. And that was something. As he drifted off, one thought lingered in his mind. If anyone could find a way to survive in this mad, unpredictable universe, it was them. After all, they'd already survived each other. The walls of the tech lab felt closer than ever as Jax paced back and forth, his mind a chaotic whirl of half-formed plans and grim humor. The Rilthar Empire had decided to up the ante, their empathy weapon now doing a number on not just their minds but also the fragile alliances between the colonies. Because nothing says, "We come in peace," quite like turning your enemies into emotional porridge. Lyra was at the console, trying to make sense of the latest garbled messages from the other colonies. "Looks like the Rilthar's having a blast," she said, squinting at the screen. "Negotiations have turned into screaming matches. One colony's threatening to stop mining operations. Course, they'd have better luck mining for brains around here." Jax ran a hand through his hair, which had seen less grease than the colony's air recyclers. "Perfect. Just what we need. Less ore, more drama. It's like the universe decided to drop the soap in a prison shower." Ferris, ever the optimist in a sea of cynicism, hovered nearby. "I heard a rumor there's a flaw in the Rilthar's weapon. Some kind of energy instability. But we'd need resources to exploit it. Resources we don't have. Rumors are like ration bars, Ferris," Jax said. "The more you chew on them, the less satisfying they get. But it's not like we have better options." Lyra sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Great. So, we're back to square one, with a side order of panic. Remind me again why we didn't just stay on Earth and sell used hovercars." Jax smirked. "Because we wanted to be pioneers. Blazing trails, reaching for the stars. Or, just finding new ways to die in a vacuum." Speaking of dying in vacuums, Ferris chimed in, "The miners are getting jittery. The last thing we need is a bunch of them deciding to take a sabbatical and form a space yoga retreat. Then we better fix this mess before everyone decides enlightenment's just a better option than listening to Marlowe's speeches," Jax muttered. The door to the lab hissed open, and in walked Skeevers, looking like he hadn't showered since the last ice age. "Hey, Chief, Hopper's got some ideas about that weapon. Crazy stuff, but what isn't these days?" "Bring him in," Jax said. "I could use some fresh lunacy." Hopper shuffled in, looking like a man who'd misplaced his sanity and wasn't too concerned about finding it. "You rang?" he drawled, eyes darting around like a caged animal. "Hopper," Jax began, steeling himself for what was surely going to be a wild ride. "Skeevers says you've got some thoughts on the Rilthar weapon." Hopper nodded, his expression a mix of excitement and exhaustion. "Yeah, man. So, the Rilthar tech, it's like a hyper-advanced mood ring, yeah. Amplifies emotions, makes people go all weepy or stabby. But I think there's a way to reverse it, turn it back on them." "Turn it back on them?" Lyra echoed, skepticism dripping from her words. "You're talking about using their own weapon against them. Sounds like playing catch with a live grenade." Hopper flashed a grin. "Exactly. They wouldn't see it coming. But we'd need to get close, real close. Like, invite 'em over for dinner and hope you don't become the main course, close." Jax rubbed his temples. "So, we're supposed to waltz up to the Rilthar with a bouquet and a smile, then what? Tell them we're here for an emotional intervention?" "Pretty much," Hopper replied, unfazed. "We'd need a way to shield our guys from the blast, though. Otherwise, we'll just end up being a bunch of sobbing wrecks, and that's no good." Jax glanced at Lyra. "Think our makeshift jammer could be adapted for that kind of operation?" She shrugged. "Maybe, but it's like asking a paperclip to hold a ship together. It might work, but I wouldn't bet my last ration on it." "Good thing I'm not a betting man," Jax said. "But if there's even a slim chance we can pull this off, we have to try. Otherwise, we're just waiting for the Rilthar to turn us into their emotional crash test dummies." Ferris looked between them, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What's the plan then, Chief?" Jax leaned back, considering their options. "First, we need to make sure the Council doesn't go full soap opera on us. Then we figure out how to get close enough to the Rilthar without turning into mush." "Sounds like a party," Lyra said, deadpan. "I'll bring the chips." "Better make them emotional support chips," Jax replied with a wry grin. "We'll need all the support we can get." As they strategized, the air around them seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. The stakes were high, and failure meant more than just another day of griping about broken tech and ration bars. It meant the end of whatever fragile peace they'd managed to cobble together. Jax's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beep from the console, Lyra's fingers flying over keys as she scanned the message. "Jax, it's from the mining colony. They're halting operations. They want assurances we can fix this, or they're out." Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Just what we needed. An ultimatum from a bunch of rock huggers. "The clock's ticking," Ferris said softly. "If they stop mining, we're toast. We need those minerals to keep everything running." "Tell me something I don't know," Jax replied. "All right, first things first. We need to test Hopper's idea, see if it's even remotely feasible. Lyra, can you and Ferris rig up something that won't blow us to Kingdom Come? Lyra nodded. We'll give it a shot. But don't expect fireworks. Good, Jax said, determination hardening his voice. Now, let's get to it before the universe decides to pull the rug out from under us again. As they got to work, the reality of their situation loomed large. Nereid 7 might be a backwater colony, but it was their backwater colony, and Jax would be damned if he let it fall apart on his watch. They had to succeed, not just for themselves, but for everyone depending on them. A few hours later, they stood in a dimly lit chamber, their makeshift device cobbled together from the colony's limited resources. Wires dangled like jungle vines, and the whole thing looked about as stable as a politician's campaign promises. It's like an art installation gone wrong, Lyra quipped, a faint smile playing on her lips. Let's hope it performs better than it looks, Jax said, eyeing the contraption warily. Hopper, you're up, give us the rundown. Hopper stepped forward, his usual jittery energy replaced by a rare focus. Alright, so the idea is to reverse the weapon's polarity, send those emotions right back to the Rilthar. But to do that, we need to calibrate this baby to their frequency first. And how exactly do we plan on doing that? Lyra asked, arms crossed. Easy, Hopper replied, grinning like a madman. We borrow some of their signal right under their noses. No biggie, then, Jax said dryly. Just a little light theft from a race known for melting minds for fun. We'll need to intercept a Rilthar transmission, Lyra continued, her mind already whirring with possibilities. If we can crack their encryption, we can use their own data against them. Jax nodded. Alright, let's get to it before someone has a change of heart and decides to go on a feelings spree. With the plan set, they worked into the night, exhaustion pressing down on them like the weight of a collapsing star. But for all the cynicism and dark humor, there was a glimmer of hope. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they could pull off the impossible. Finally, as the first light of a distant sun began to filter through the colony's reinforced windows, they stood ready. The device hummed with potential, a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Jax turned to his team, his voice steady despite the chaos. Alright, folks, this is it. Let's give the Rilthar a taste of their own medicine. With that, they activated the device, sending a surge of energy toward the Rilthar fleet. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and Jax felt his hopes plummet. Then, like a tidal wave crashing against the shore, the Rilthar's weapon faltered, the emotional barrage dissipating into nothingness. The room erupted in cheers, but Jax held his breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sure enough, a new message appeared on the console, Lyra quickly deciphering it. The Rilthar are confused. They're retreating to regroup. Jax let out a slow breath, relief flooding his veins. We did it, he murmured, a weary smile spreading across his face. But as his team celebrated, he knew the fight wasn't over. The Rilthar would be back, and they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The reprieve they'd won was only temporary, a fleeting victory in a war that would continue to rage on. Still, for now, they had a chance. A chance to regroup, to plan, to fight another day. And in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. Because on Nereid 7, hope might be scarce, but it was never in short supply. Jax Oban had seen some bad days. He'd seen the kind of days that made a man question his life choices, like the time he thought wearing a moustache would make him look distinguished. But none of those bad days quite matched the rolling disaster that was currently unfolding on Nereid 7. The Rilthar's withdrawal had been a small mercy, like finding a single piece of chocolate in the desert. But Jax knew it wouldn't last. The real problem was that the damned empathy weapon had already sown enough discord to make a Shakespearean tragedy look like a children's play. Jax, you look like you've just seen your reflection in a polished hull, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the chaos. She was hunched over the console, which sputtered with static that matched the frazzled state of her hair. I think I'd prefer that, Jax muttered, surveying the room filled with bickering colonists. At least my reflection doesn't shout back. Ferris wandered over, his usual optimism hanging by a thread. The councils at each other's throats. It's like a soap opera, only with more facial hair and fewer commercial breaks. Great, Jax said with a sigh. Just what we need. A melodramatic council when what we're fighting is basically a giant cosmic mood swing. Maybe we should just put them all in a room with the empathy weapon and let them hug it out, Ferris suggested, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jax snorted. Knowing our luck, they'd end up eating each other. The way things are going, I'm surprised they don't start flinging ration bars like grenades. A crash resounded from the far side of the room, and Skeevers emerged from a pile of overturned storage crates, looking like he was wearing a coat made of dust. Hey, Chief, bad news. Hopper tried to boost the power on the empathy disruptor and, Well, let's just say it didn't go as planned. Let me guess, Lyra interjected, it blew up in his face. Along with half the workshop, Skeevers confirmed, shrugging as if this was just another Tuesday. Hopper's fine, but he's babbling about colors and sounds that don't exist. Perfect, Jax said, rubbing his temples as if he could massage away the existential dread. Remind me to give him a medal once he stops licking the walls. Lyra glanced up from the console, worry etched on her face. We're in serious trouble, Jax. If the council can't get it together, we're done. And I mean, last act of a disaster movie, done. Jax nodded, his expression grim. I know. Thing is, we can't let them keep floundering around like fish on dry land. We need to get everyone on the same page. And how the hell do we do that? Ferris asked, crossing his arms. We can't exactly hold a workshop on getting along with your fellow human. Jax ran a hand through his hair, which was looking increasingly like a bird's nest. We need to remind them what they're fighting for. Remind them of home, of Earth. The things we left behind, the reasons we came here in the first place. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You think nostalgia's gonna snap them out of a psychic breakdown? I think it's worth a shot, Jax replied. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? They break into song? Skeevers snickered. I don't know, Chief. I've heard you sing. Ignoring the jab, Jax turned back to Lyra. Get a message out. Tell them to meet in the conference room. It's time for a little heart-to-heart. Heart-to-heart? With this group? Lyra shook her head. You're either a genius or you've finally lost it. Probably both, Jax said, cracking a small smile. But desperate times and all that. As Lyra sent out the message, Jax paced the tech lab, trying to formulate something resembling a plan. The Rilthar's attack had scattered them, played them against each other like pieces on a broken chessboard. It was time to remind him that they were on the same side, even if it felt like the losing one. All right, everybody, Jax announced, trying to inject some authority into his voice as the colony's motley crew gathered in the conference room. It wasn't much more than a repurposed storage closet with delusions of grandeur, but it would have to do. He glanced around, seeing familiar faces, the ones who hadn't fled to the space yoga retreat Ferris had joked about. Marlowe was there, looking as self-important as ever, and Hopper had managed to recover enough to stop giggling at invisible jokes. Jax cleared his throat. Listen up, I know things are rough right now. The Rilthar hit us hard, and we're all feeling the effects. But if we let them turn us against each other, we've already lost. Lyra stepped up beside him, her presence lending him strength. We came here for a better future. It hasn't exactly gone to plan, but we can't give up now. We've faced rough patches before, and we'll face them again. But only if we stand together. Marlowe scoffed, arms crossed. And what, exactly, are we supposed to do, Jax? Just hold hands and hope for the best. Not quite, Jax replied, fixing him with a steady gaze. But we need to stop fighting each other and start fighting for each other. We need to show the Rilthar that we're not just a bunch of bickering colonists. We're a community. Ferris nodded, his earlier uncertainty giving way to resolve. I'm with you, Jax. If the Rilthar think they can tear us apart, they're in for a surprise. Jax allowed himself a small, genuine smile. That's the spirit. Now let's get back out there and show them what Nereid 7 is made of. The murmur of agreement that followed wasn't exactly a rousing cheer, but it was a start. As the group began to disperse, Jax felt a flicker of hope. A fragile thing, but enough to light the way forward. Lyra lingered behind, watching as the others filed out. Think it'll work? She asked, her voice soft. It has to, Jax replied, meeting her gaze. Because if it doesn't, we're all screwed. Then let's make sure it does, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. With their plans set, Jax and his crew returned to the tech lab, ready to face whatever came next. They might be outgunned and outmaneuvered, but they still had each other. And as Jax had learned over the years, sometimes that was more powerful than any weapon. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jax and Lyra worked around the clock, patching up systems and trying to keep the peace among the colonists. The empathy weapon's effects were still being felt, but the worst of the hysteria had passed, leaving behind a pervasive sense of unease. Hopper and Skeevers tinkered with the disruptor, trying to push it beyond its limits without causing another explosion. Ferris took on the role of morale officer, rallying the miners and reminding him of the resources they were fighting to protect. Jax watched it all unfold, feeling more like a referee than a leader. But slowly, the colony began to stabilize. Disagreements still flared up like solar flares, but they were quickly extinguished, and the sense of camaraderie that had been missing since the Rilthar's attack began to return. Looks like your pep talk did the trick, Lyra said one evening as they stood by the observation window, watching the stars wheel overhead. For now, Jax replied, his voice cautious. But we can't afford to let our guard down. The Rilthar will be back, and we need to be ready. Lyra nodded, her expression sober. Then let's make sure we are. We've come this far, Jax. We can't let them take it away from us. Jax glanced at her, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Lyra. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably end up singing to yourself in a padded room, she said, with a teasing glint in her eye. More like serenading a punching bag, Jax retorted, a grin tugging at his lips. They stood in companionable silence, the weight of responsibility shared between them. The future was uncertain, but for once, Jax felt something he hadn't in a long time. The faint, distant echo of hope. And on Nereid 7, where hope was as rare as water in the desert, that was more precious than gold. Jax Oban was having a day that kept redefining the word, bad, with each passing hour. He was in the tech lab, trying to fix things with a tool that looked like it was cobbled together from bits of scrap metal and hope. Lyra Quine was hunched over her console, muttering curses that spanned several languages, some of which Jax suspected she was making up on the spot. Remind me why we came to this godforsaken rock again? Jax asked, trying to keep his voice light despite the mounting chaos around him. Something about adventure and new beginnings, Lyra replied, not looking up. Though personally, I'm starting to think we just drew the short straw in a cosmic joke. Well, the punchline's killing me, Jax said, tapping the side of his head with the wrench as if it might knock some sense into the universe. Careful, Jax. With the way things are going, you might actually succeed, Lyra quipped, her fingers dancing across the console keys. The communication system crackled to life, broadcasting its usual array of nonsensical messages from the colonies. It was like listening to a radio station that had forgotten how music worked. One garbled voice mentioned something about a digital empathy filter, causing Jax to pause mid-wrench. Did you catch that? Jax asked, his ears perking up like a dog hearing the word, walk. Lyra rewound the message, her eyes narrowing at the audio. Yeah, it sounded like, digital empathy filter. Could be the break we've been hoping for. Or another wild goose chase, Jax said, though he'd never been one to shy away from chasing geese, wild or otherwise, if it meant getting out of this mess. Only one way to find out, Lyra said, her pragmatic side taking over. It's not like we have a better option, unless you count gnawing on ration bars until the Rilthar come back. Jax winced at the thought. Let's not. I've had enough of those cardboard delights to last a lifetime. They set to work, with Jax diving into the tangled mess of wires and circuits, trying to piece together something that might resemble a digital empathy filter. Lyra was at the console, her fingers flying across keys as she sifted through messages, hoping to confirm that what they'd heard wasn't just another glitch. In the corner, Hopper and Skeevers were engaged in their usual banter, the kind that involved more insults than actual conversation. Hopper looked like he hadn't slept in days, which, given his track record, he probably hadn't. Hey, Hopper, Jax called, not looking up from his work. Got any bright ideas, or just more ways to break things? Hopper scratched his head, a gesture that was meant to convey thoughtfulness but came across more like a primate searching for fleas. Actually, I was thinking we could jury-rig the air recyclers too. Nope, Jax interrupted, shaking his head. Not touching the air recyclers. Last time we did that, the place smelled like burnt toast for weeks. Fair point, Hopper conceded, deflating slightly. Skeevers, never one to miss an opportunity to poke fun, chimed in. Besides, I'm pretty sure we used all our duct tape on your last bright idea. Yeah, Hopper muttered, waving him off. I get it. Just let me know if you need something blown up. Trust me, Jax said with a grin. If we need something blown up, you will be the first to know. With a plan in motion, or at least the semblance of one, Jax and Lyra worked tirelessly to cobble together something resembling a digital empathy filter. It was a Hail Mary, but given their current luck, it was the best shot they had. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few hours, Jax stood back, surveying their creation. It looked like a cross between a toaster and a piece of modern art, but if it worked, it didn't matter what it looked like. There, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. It's not pretty, but hopefully, it'll help us counter this damn empathy weapon. Lyra nodded, her eyes weary but determined. Let's test it out. Can't be any worse than the current mess we're in. They hooked up the makeshift filter to the communication system, and after a few tense moments, the garbled voices began to clear. It was like wiping steam from a mirror, and for the first time in days, the colonists' messages were coherent. It's working, Jax said, unable to keep the disbelief out of his voice. Let's not celebrate just yet, Lyra cautioned, ever the realist. We need to make sure it holds. Over the next few days, the digital empathy filter proved to be a turning point. The colonists were no longer at each other's throats, and the sense of camaraderie that had been missing since the Rilthar's attack began to return. It was far from perfect, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. Jax gathered the council in the conference room, the glorified closet feeling a little less oppressive now that they weren't on the brink of tearing each other's heads off. Marlowe was there, looking slightly less insufferable than usual, and Ferris was positively beaming, his optimism no longer hanging by a thread. "All right," Jax began, feeling the weight of countless eyes on him. "We've managed to buy ourselves some time with this filter, but it's not a permanent solution. We need to use this opportunity to plan our next move." Lyra nodded, standing by his side as always. "The Rilthar will be back, and we can't rely on this filter forever. We need to figure out a way to hit them where it hurts." Marlowe, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. "And how do you propose we do that, Jax? Throw positive vibes at them?" Jax resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Actually, I was thinking something a bit more tangible, like finding that rumored flaw in their weapon. If we can exploit that, we might stand a chance." Ferris chimed in, his voice steady. "Rumor has it the Rilthar's weapon has an energy instability. If we can locate that and amplify it, we could turn the tables." "That's a big if," Marlowe pointed out, though his tone was less combative than usual. "True," Jax admitted, "but it's the best lead we have. We need to focus our efforts on finding that flaw and figuring out how to use it to our advantage." The group nodded, a sense of determination settling over them. It was a fragile thing, held together by duct tape and hope, but it was better than nothing. As the meeting wrapped up, Jax lingered behind, watching as the others filtered out. Lyra stayed by his side, her presence a comforting constant. "Think we can pull this off?" she asked, her voice quiet. "We have to," Jax replied, echoing a sentiment that had become all too familiar. "We've come too far to give up now." "Then let's get to work," she said, her eyes sharp with resolve. The following days were a flurry of activity as they worked to uncover the Rilthar's weakness. Jax and Lyra combed through every piece of intel they could find, while Hopper and Skeevers tinkered with the disruptor, pushing it to its limits in the hopes of finding a breakthrough. Ferris took on the role of morale officer once more, rallying the colonists and reminding them of what they were fighting for. It was a delicate balance, keeping spirits high while the threat of the Rilthar loomed overhead, but somehow, they managed. One evening, as Jax sat in the tech lab, surrounded by the usual chaos, Lyra joined him, her expression thoughtful. "I think I've found something," she said, holding a datapad covered in notes and schematics. Jax leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What is it?" "It's a recording from one of the Rilthar's older attacks," she explained, showing him a grainy video of a similar empathy weapon malfunctioning. "Look at the energy readings here. It spikes just before the weapon fails." Jax studied the data, his mind racing. "That's it, the instability. If we can recreate those conditions, we might be able to cause their weapon to backfire." Lyra nodded, a rare smile breaking through her usual stoicism. "Exactly. We just need to figure out how to replicate it on a larger scale." "All right," Jax said, feeling a spark of hope. "Let's get to work. If we can pull this off, we might just have a shot at turning the tide." They spent hours poring over the data, working in tandem to devise a plan. It was an uphill battle, fraught with uncertainty, but they were determined. The Rilthar had underestimated them, and now it was time to show what humans were truly capable of. With each passing day, their plan took shape, a delicate web woven from desperation and ingenuity. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance to fight back against the Rilthar and reclaim their futures. Jax knew the road ahead would be perilous, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed they might actually succeed. And on Nereid 7, where hope was as rare as a day without mishaps, that was something worth fighting for. Jax Oban stood at the center of the tech lab, surrounded by a chaotic orchestra of beeping machinery and flickering lights. It was a place where hope went to die, but today it felt like it might just be resurrected, albeit in a shoddy form with questionable morals. "Hey, Lyra," Jax said, trying to untangle a mess of wires that looked like a spaghetti monster had partied too hard and passed out on the floor. "Do you think we'll ever have a day where everything just works?" Lyra snorted, her fingers flying over the console with the grace of a practiced pianist who didn't give a damn about classical music. "If that day ever comes, I'll probably die of shock. But then again, at least I won't have to fix this wreck anymore." Their digital empathy filter had bought them some time, but time was a fickle friend, one that stabbed you in the back as soon as you turned around. Right now, they needed to find a way to make that extra time count against the Rilthar. "Okay, so let's recap," Jax said, tossing a wrench onto the workbench. "We have a weapon that makes everyone feel like they're in a bad soap opera, a filter that may or may not hold, and a bunch of colonists who are one argument away from starting World War whatever." "Sounds like the beginning of a beautiful victory," Lyra replied dryly. If we can just figure out how to make their weapon implode, we might stand a fighting chance. Jax glanced over at Hopper and Skeevers, who were arguing, again, in the corner of the lab. And we have our own comedy duo. Maybe we can throw them at the Rilthar as a distraction. Hopper, overhearing, shot Jax a bleary-eyed glare. Hey, I resemble that remark. Skeevers, ever the opportunist, grinned. Just as long as I get to blow something up in the process, I'm in. That's the spirit, Jax said with a sardonic salute. Now, if we can focus that enthusiasm on something productive, we might not end up as Alien Chow. The plan was as simple as it was insane. Harness the energy instability in the Rilthar's weapon and use it against them. It was a bit like hoping the cat would eat the rat it was terrified of, but when you're clutching at straws, you learn to knit. Let's get these readings aligned, Lyra said, her expression more focused than Jax had seen it in days. If we can replicate that energy spike from the malfunction video, we'll have a shot. Jax nodded, shoving aside the creeping sensation of doubt that threatened to derail his resolve. Right, Hopper, Skeevers, I need you two to keep the empathy disruptor running without blowing it up. Ah, the impossible task, Skeevers said with a dramatic sigh. My favorite. Hopper cracked his knuckles, which sounded like an old ship's hull groaning under pressure. Don't worry, I'll babysit him. Great, Jax replied, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince them or himself. Ferris, how's the morale out there? Ferris, who had joined them with an optimism that should have been outlawed long ago, smiled with the sincere glow of someone who didn't know any better. People are holding up, they believe in the plan. Well, most of them do. Good enough for me, Jax said, hoping that belief would be enough to carry him through. The operation began with a flurry of activity. Jax and Lyra coordinated with other teams across the colony, using the communication system they managed to patch together with metaphorical duct tape and prayers. Every colonist was given a task. Every task was a piece of the puzzle that, if solved, might just save their skins. Remember, we don't have to destroy the weapon, Lyra reminded them over the crackling comms. We just need to make it backfire. If we can create enough interference, it'll collapse under its own instability. Simple as pie, Jax joked, though he'd never found pie making simple, even under normal circumstances. Pie would be good right about now, Hopper muttered, his stomach growling in agreement. Better than these ration bars, anyway. Focus on not blowing us up first, Skeevers quipped. Then we'll talk pie. The hours ticked by with the kind of tension that made you wish your bones could crack just to relieve the pressure. They were running on hope and adrenaline, with exhaustion snapping at their heels like a particularly persistent terrier. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Lyra straightened from her console with a look of triumph. I think we've got it. We can trigger the energy spike remotely using the disrupted signals from the colonies. Jax felt relief wash over him, though he kept it tempered with the knowledge that success was never guaranteed. All right, people, let's show the Rilthar they picked the wrong group to mess with. The plan was set into motion with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop, but finesse was overrated when brute force was both available and satisfying. As the colonies coordinated their efforts, a surge of power rippled through the systems, aimed directly at the Rilthar's empathy network. Here goes nothing, Lyra said, tapping the final command into the console. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The Rilthar weapon, once an indomitable force, began to shudder and thrum with an ominous energy. Its stability, already precarious, gave way under the orchestrated interference from the colonies. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion, each piece a testament to the collective will of those who refused to bow down. Jax watched the readings with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. It's working. Holy hell, it's actually working. The tremors spread through the Rilthar's network, causing it to buckle and fold. Their mighty weapon, so reliant on its technological superiority, crumbled under the pressure of its own flaw. The realization hit Jax like a freight train, leaving him breathless. Hell yeah, Hopper cheered, punching the air with a vigor that defied his sleep-deprived state. Skeevers gave a whoop of triumph that echoed through the lab. If any aliens want to mess with us, they better think twice now. Ferris, ever the beacon of positivity, clapped Jax on the back. We did it, Jax. We actually did it. The colony erupted into cautious celebration, the tension easing as the threat of the empathy weapon faded into memory. It wasn't a complete victory, there were still battles to fight, alliances to mend, but it was a hell of a start. Jax looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him, who had refused to give up even when all seemed lost. It was a motley crew, to be sure, but they were his crew, and together they'd done the impossible. All right, everyone, Jax said, drawing their attention. This isn't the end, not by a long shot. But it's a damn good beginning. Lyra nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with a rare softness. For now, let's take the win. There'll be plenty of time for the next disaster. Could go for a disaster-free week, Hopper muttered, though a grin tugged at his lips. Skeevers chuckled, shaking his head. Not likely, buddy, but hey, we can dream. As the colony began to settle into a new rhythm, one unburdened by the immediate threat of the Rilthar weapon, Jax felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't gone entirely, but it was lighter, more manageable. And in the grim dark void of space, where survival was a game of inches and optimism was a rare commodity, that was more than enough. The days that followed were a whirlwind of repairs and rebuilding, of mending bridges and forging new paths forward. Jax spent his time in the tech lab, overseeing the repair of systems that had been neglected in the chaos, ensuring that when the next threat came, and it would come, they'd be ready. Lyra kept busy coordinating with the colonies, her caustic wit a constant companion to her efficiency. Together, they formed a team that was, if not unstoppable, then at least damn hard to deter. Think we'll ever get a break? Jax asked one evening as they surveyed the latest batch of data from the colonies. Lyra gave a snort that was half amusement, half exasperation. With our luck, don't count on it. Jax grinned, leaning back in his chair with a contentment that was as rare as it was cherished. Yeah, probably right. But you know what? I'd still rather fight here, with you all, than anywhere else. Getting sentimental on me, Oban? Lyra teased, though her smile softened the words. Just telling it like it is, he replied, watching as the stars outside the viewport twinkled against the inky darkness, a reminder of the vast unknown that lay beyond their fragile sanctuary. And sir, with their victory secured and their spirits buoyed, the colonists of Nereid 7 forged ahead, ready to face whatever the universe had in store for them. It wouldn't be easy, it never was. But they had each other, and that, Jax thought with a grin, was more than enough to face whatever came next. The aftermath of the great Rilthar weapon incident left Nereid 7 looking like a teenager's bedroom after a particularly wild party. Messy, chaotic, and with the distinct scent of something that should probably be cleaned up sooner rather than later. But for the first time in a while, there was a collective sense of cautious optimism threading through the colony. Jax Oban strolled through the tech lab, which was slowly regaining some semblance of order. The machinery hummed with an energy that was neither apocalyptic nor homicidal, which was a nice change of pace. Sure, there was still the odd flicker of lights reminiscent of a horror vid, but it felt almost cozy now. Like home. Look at that, Jax said, gesturing to an airy cycler that wasn't wheezing like a geriatric marathon runner. Almost like we know what we're doing. Lyra Quine, ever the realist, peered over her console, one eyebrow raised in skepticism. Don't get too comfortable. It's all fun and games until the next piece of tech decides to play dead. You're a real ray of sunshine, Jax replied, grinning. Remind me why I keep you around. She smirked, tapping at her console with the kind of efficiency that made others look like they were working with mittens on. Because I'm the only one who can make sense of this mess you call a communication system. Jax chuckled, knowing full well how true that was. Fair enough. On the other side of the lab, Hopper and Skeevers were engaged in their usual routine of verbal sparring. Hopper was fiddling with a tangle of wires that looked like they might have once had a purpose, while Skeevers watched with the detached interest of someone waiting for an explosion. So, do we call this a victory or just a postponed disaster? Hopper asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many victories turn sour. Either way, we're not dead, which is more than I can say for my last 5 projects, Skeevers replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. I'd call that a win. Ferris wandered in, looking like he'd just come from a motivational seminar, which was to say, like he had too much hope for someone living in a grim dark sci-fi world. Hey, I hear the council's planning a celebration. Celebration? Lyra barked a laugh. What, did someone finally figure out how to replicate chocolate? Ferris shrugged, undeterred. They think it's important to boost morale. Make people feel good about the future. Yeah, well, good luck with that, Jax muttered. The future usually feels like a kick in the teeth. The Colony Council, a bunch of well-meaning if slightly delusional folks, had decided that now was the perfect time for a little festivity. Jax had a sneaking suspicion they were just trying to distract everyone from the fact that the Rilthar could still decide they were worth squashing like bugs. But the Rilthar weren't squashing just yet. In fact, their vast network of emotionally manipulated worlds was suddenly as functional as a drunk at a sobriety checkpoint. The weapon's implosion had taken them by surprise, and word on the grapevine was that they were scrambling to figure out just how things had gone so spectacularly wrong. A celebration could be nice, Skeevers mused, twirling a loose wire like it was a fine cigar. Maybe even invite the Rilthar. Show them we can party just as hard as we can fight. Or explode, Lyra added flatly. The notion of a celebration, however, held a certain appeal. It was hard to stay cynical and world-weary when there was a chance at free alcohol and the possibility of someone making a fool of themselves on the dance floor. The big event was set to take place in the mess hall, which was rapidly being transformed from a utilitarian food distribution center into something resembling a social space. Jax, not one for standing on ceremony, had managed to finagle some drink tokens and was nursing a beverage that tasted suspiciously like it had been made from fermented shoe polish. To surviving another week, he toasted, raising his glass to the gathered crew. May we survive the next, Hopper added, clinking his drink with the others. As the evening wore on, the mood in the room lifted. It was amazing what a little music and the promise of questionable alcohol could do for a group of people who, up until recently, hadn't had much to celebrate. Even the air recyclers seemed to be in on it, chugging along with a rhythm that was almost danceable. Jax found himself standing near the makeshift bar, watching the colony's inhabitants let loose. Ferris was deep in conversation with Marlowe, the colony's self-proclaimed visionary whose charisma was roughly on par with a damp towel. Still, they seemed to be getting along, and Jax figured it was nice to see someone talking sense into Marlowe for once. Never thought I'd see the day, Lyra said, joining Jax with a fresh drink in hand. Marlowe actually listening to someone else. Miracles do happen, Jax replied, though his tone was laced with the same skepticism he'd always carried. Maybe we should charge admission. Their banter was interrupted by a sudden hush that fell over the crowd. Jax followed the line of sight of those around him to see that the main holo display was flickering to life, its screen not showing garbled images or static for once. It was the Rilthar, or at least, their ambassador, a creature who looked like someone had mashed up a squid and a librarian, was addressing them with the kind of gravitas usually reserved for award ceremonies or executions. We have received your communication, the Rilthar began, its voice a series of clicks and hisses translated through an electronic filter. Jax always thought it made him sound like they were perpetually disappointed in everyone. We acknowledge the events that transpired and agree that a new understanding must be reached. The room held its collective breath. This was the moment. Were they about to be invited to tea? Or was this the prelude to being vaporized off the face of whatever celestial body they occupied? We propose a cessation of hostilities, the Rilthar continued, as if the words tasted foreign. We recognize your ingenuity. Jax blinked, his brain working overtime to process the notion that the Rilthar, the same beings who had tried to turn him into emotional pudding, were now offering a truce. Well, that's a plot twist, Skeevers muttered, his grin widening at the prospect of surviving another day. Guess they figured out that we're not as easy to manipulate as they thought, Lyra added, her satisfaction evident. The ambassador concluded its message with the promise of further negotiations, and as the holo display flickered off, a cheer erupted through the mess hall. The celebration, already in full swing, kicked up a notch, and Jax allowed himself to bask in the warmth of camaraderie and the intoxicating sense of having one less existential threat looming over them. The night stretched on, laughter and music spilling out into the corridors and bouncing off the metal walls. Jax found himself sharing stories with friends and allies, their voices mingling with the distant hum of machinery. For a brief moment, the burdens of leadership, the weight of responsibility, felt lighter. As the celebrations began to wind down, Jax stood at the edge of the room, watching as groups of tired but exhilarated colonists made their way back to their quarters. Lyra joined him again, her gaze following his. Think they'll stick to their word? She asked, her voice low, serious. Who knows? Jax replied, his tone measured. But for now, we've earned a little peace, even if it's temporary. Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, maybe they finally realized there are better ways to deal with this than trying to turn us into the galaxy's biggest soap opera. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from knowing that, for all the universe's trials and tribulations, they'd managed to come out the other side. Scraped and bruised, sure, but still standing. As the last of the stragglers left the mess hall, Jax and Lyra lingered for a moment longer, the silence settling around them like an old, comfortable blanket. It was a rare moment of calm in a life that often felt like one long sprint from one crisis to the next. Here's to tomorrow, Jax said, raising the last of his drink in a mock toast. May it be as uneventful as possible, Lyra added, clinking her glass against his. With that, they turned and headed back to the tech lab, ready to face whatever the universe had in store next. After all, they were human, and if there was one thing humanity was good at, it was surviving against the odds. And as Jax walked alongside his ragtag team of misfits, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Not the naive kind that got you killed, but the kind that whispered there was still a future worth fighting for. A future where, maybe just maybe, they could carve out a place for themselves amidst the stars. And so, with a grin and a renewed sense of purpose, Jax Oban set forth, ready to tackle whatever grim dark adventure awaited them next.